We're glad that you're here. Hope you've had a good day. Has everybody had a good day? This is yes. This is no. This is, well, okay. We had a day. We're glad that you're here. Hope that you did have a good day. Hope that, like I say, they're talking about rain and bunches of rain, but hopefully we won't get a bunches of rain, just some rain, and that will be nice. I started, by the way, when it showed up this morning, I almost started preaching the sermon. And then I realized in the back of my mind, I don't have everything in my head like I want it for that one because I was thinking about the other one. So I just, It happened in Point Barrow, Alaska. 3 gray whales had gotten too close to shore. And they had gotten frozen and they needed to return to the ocean, but that was some 5 miles away. And so about the only way that they could get the gray whales back out into the ocean was to dig holes in the ice. And so every 20 yards, they dug holes in the ice. And once they dig a hole or make a hole, they would then try to lure the whales to the next hole. 8 days they did this. One of the whales, they figure they lost somewhere along the way, but they saved 2 whales. When you think about that illustration, there's a lot of different ways to go at it, but think about the idea of going from one hole to the next, what they had to do to get the whales to go to the next hole. How that they had to simply encourage them out into the ocean. Well, we live life and we need encouragement from time to time. We need folks to say, hey, good job. That's the way to go. That's the way to do it. We need encouragement. We're to be encouragers. We're to lift up the hands that hang down. We're to make sure the feeble knees. Isaiah 35 tells us. We have a responsibility to encourage one another. We live in a world of people. And as people, we are, by all means, to serve one another, but we are to be individuals that are trying to help others. When you really stop and think about fellowship, fellowship is what? Joint participation. Well, it's joint participation in worship is one way. But why do you think that God wanted us to have collective worship within, as we do it, within a building? Probably, at least in part. God understood the importance of Christians of like precious faith getting together and encouraging one another. From time to time, from, as for us, worship service to worship service, to get together and spend time building up one another's spirits, building up one another's morals, building up one another's faith. And so, we need to be reminded that we need to be encouragers. But it's one thing to say, well, we need to be encouragers and we need to encourage. But how do you go about doing that? How do you go about being a good, great encourager? Well, let's look at some ideas and some thoughts this evening about how we can go about being good encouragers. Number 1, give less inspection, less, if you will, attention to the imperfections of others. We often look at things and we look at the negative aspect, don't we? We look at a piece of paper and it's got a spot on it. What do we see? It can be a pure white piece of paper, but we see the spot. We notice the spot. Someone can look at us and we'll notice the imperfection. Their glasses are crooked. Their sideburns aren't straight. Their sideburns don't match one another. We look at their hair. Well, they've got 3 hairs out of place. That would be all of my hairs. But anyway, we thank you, Steve. But we understand that we look at folks and we see the imperfections. And sometimes, really, we're like the little boy that went up to a friend of his and he said, I wish my mama could find something good in me. Well, of course, you might turn that around as a parent and say, I wish he could behave. But, we need folks not to see what we do that's wrong. We need folks to see what we do that's right and good. And so the challenge then is to be a person that looks for the good. You see, really in life, you have two choices. You can either be a bee. When you think about a bee, what does a bee do? Bee goes from flower to flower, some of the most beautiful things that God created, in search of pollen. And you can be a bee that, simply put, goes from beautiful attitude, beautiful idea to the next. Or you can be a buzzard. Now, my roommate in college called me a buzzard. Of course, I called him a buzzard. But a buzzard, what does it do? It looks for what is dead and decaying. That's what God made it for, I understand. But at the same time, too, it's looking for what's rotten. In life, you can be the individual that goes around, looks for what's rotten in people. You can see the imperfections. You can see the things that don't match up. Or you can look for what is good. You know, Jesus, in talking about something that, yes, was a little bit different, but the application can be made. In Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7 says, judge not that you be not judged. For what judgment you judge, it shall be judged unto you. For what measure you meet, it shall be measured unto you. We need to consider the principle. The principle is simple. The principle is be careful how you look at others, because it's going to come back to you. It's going to come back and sometimes smack you in the face. We need to be individuals that are forbearing. The idea of being patient with others. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. Forbear one another. We don't need to be individuals that are supercritical. James reminds us that if we are folks that complain, murmur and complain, that we condemn others, then we become judges of the law. And if we become judges of the law, then what does James tell us? He says we're not a doer of the law, but we're a judge. And such is wrong. And so we're reminded then in life to look for the good. Well, how do we meet that challenge? If that's the challenge, how do we meet that challenge? By simply going through the dirt. Andrew Carnegie, you may have heard of him. He came from Scotland to the United States of America. He tried his hand at several things. He eventually ended up in steel. Multi-millionaire. Matter of fact, at one time, it was counted that under his direction, he had working for him 43 millionaires. Someone asked him for an article for a magazine. Asked him, how did he go about getting 43 millionaires to work under him? And he said, well, it's really like this. He says, when you mine for gold, you have to go through a lot of dirt. And he said, in order to find these folks, I had to go through a lot of dirt till I found them and gave them what I felt that they were worth. We need to look for the good in others to see it. Think about a great Bible example. Think about Jesus. Jesus really looked for the good, and he looked for the good in others. Think about just one of his 12 apostles. Think about Peter. Peter was, if you look at him from a character standpoint, he was outspoken. He was always the first to speak. If there were apostles there in the presence of Jesus, go through Matthew or Mark or Luke or John. Who's the first to answer? It's Peter. Who jumped up and basically forbade the Lord? Matthew, Peter. Who, when they came to take Jesus away, cut off Malchus' ear? It's Peter. Peter was a man of great imperfections. Now, we talked recently about the fact that, yes, he was good. Yes, he preached in Acts 2, the first gospel sermon, early leader in the church, elder in the church, 1 Peter chapter 5. But think about his nature. Jesus didn't look and say, I can't have a man like that in my service. I can't have a man like that taking my ministry up from me or after I leave. He chose Peter. Why? He saw in Peter not the imperfections, but he saw what Peter could do. And then we see it in Acts 3, Acts 4, Acts 5, Acts 6. We see Peter in the early church, and we say, that's what God was looking for. That's what Jesus found He found not the imperfections, but what he could use. And so if we're going to be great encouragers, we need to first of all think about not the imperfections of people, but the things that are good. And so we need then to reach out to others in time of crisis. Situation again. What's the situation in life? Well, situation in life is much what we talked about this morning in our sermon. Life has its problems. Life has its difficulties. Life has its heartaches. Life has its hurts. Jay just announced one of our sister passed away this week. That happens, doesn't it? We know of people, Jay mentioned in the announcements. We remember the folks that have gone through, folks in Haiti, the folks that, and the problem in Afghanistan. We remember the folks with regards to the flood. We're remembering the folks that are being hit with the hurricane in the next few hours. We think of those things. And we see that life really does have its crisis. But inasmuch as life has its crisis, we have to ask ourselves, what's the challenge? The challenge is to help those individuals get above and beyond their crisis, to move to a point in which their crisis for them is something that is manageable. Because we know, as we talked about this morning, we need to sit and wait. God says, be still and know that I am God. That we need to remind them of the courage. We need to remind them of the good of God. And so we need to be an individual that are sure that we help them face those challenges. But how do we help them? Can you imagine ever going into a doctor and let's say having a terrible sore? I know there are shows, and I know some folks watch these shows. What is it, Dr. Pimple? He talks about popping pimples and all other kind of gross things. I'm sorry, that's not going to be played while I'm watching TV. No. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that for a profession. That would be like being a podiatrist. I can't, that's not something I could do. But now when you think about that, when you walk into the doctor's office, let's say you have that problem, and the doctor says what's wrong, and you maybe remove a coat or roll up your pant legs. You don't want the doctor to go, "Ooh!" You want that doctor to say, "Oh my," and then to get busy doing to help you overcome that issue. As an encourager, it's the same thing. You don't want to sit there and tell people, "Oh man, that's terrible, that's awful. Woo, I don't know, wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole." An encourager says, "Okay, let's see what we can do to get past the problem." That's what Jesus did, if you really think about it. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus had a man come. They brought him. He was lame. Jesus said to him what? Be of good cheer. Matthew chapter 9 again, a little later on in the chapter, there's a woman who has an issue of blood. She comes and all she wants to do is touch the hem of Jesus' garment. What does Jesus say to her? Be of good cheer. Jesus is walking on the water in Matthew chapter 14. And those apostles that were in the boat, they became afraid. Oh, maybe it's a ghost. We don't know what it is. What does Jesus tell them? Be of good cheer. What did he do? He realized that folks were in a crisis. And there are many crises, more than we could even enumerate in the time we have this evening. But we know when our buddies, our friends, our neighbors are going through a crisis. And as encouragers, we need to be individuals that are saying, okay, let me help you meet that challenge. Let me be an individual that assists you. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation. That's a transition word. That we may be able to comfort them. We need to be those people. Isn't it interesting that that's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4? Isn't it interesting that you flip over a couple of pages in 2 Corinthians and you find in the 7th chapter in verse 10 that Paul asked for the coming of Titus. Why? because he encourages us. Nevertheless, Titus comforts us, he says. What does he do? He encourages us. He builds us up. He strengthens us. He's the Stephanus and Forticaeus and the Caicus. It does what? According to 1 Corinthians 16. They were encouragers. They were spirit refreshers, Paul called them. We need to be those kind of people. There were 3 guys once that got together one evening, and they had a little time. And they looked at one another and were trying to figure out what they were going to do. It was Friday night. What are we going to do? So they looked at each other and they said, well, how much money you got? And so between the 3 of them, they had $50. We know what we're going to do. We're going to go out and we're going to buy pizza and we're going to give that pizza to the homeless. So they went out. They went to the local pizza place. They were kidding around. They were younger guys. They were kidding around. They were having a good time. They were asked what they were doing, and they were told, well, we're going to take this pizza that we're buying here, and we're going to take it down to the homeless, and we're going to feed them. So the pizza owner, the operator of the establishment, said, great. Tell you what, I'll give you some drinks. And so he gave them some drinks. And so they went downtown then and delivered pizza to the homeless. That started a ministry for them. And every Friday night, they still to this day gather together, go out, buy pizza, they get some drinks, and they go to find the homeless, and they give them a couple of slices of pizza apiece and something to drink. What are they doing? They're in crisis, those folks are, needing a little help. They look for something. You see, that's really, when you stop and think about it, we've defined success as looking for an opportunity and filling it. Looking for a need and filling it. And so to be great encouragers, that's what we do. We are to be individuals that look for and help individuals, and we reach out to them in time of crisis. But then thirdly, how do we become great encouragers? By offering hope when life's brutal. You might say, well, that's the same thing. Well, yes and no. When we think about the situation, we do think about the brutality of life. You know, life's just not fair. Life's not fair. If I heard that once from my child when he was growing up, I heard it several times. That's just not fair. Good. I knew it was fair then when he said it wasn't fair. But he had a tremendous sense. Ethan has always had a tremendous sense of what's fair. And he's really been on the mark. You know, sometimes I sided with him instead of the teachers. And, you know, that's hard when you have a teacher. But sometimes I thought, you know, yeah, that is. But you're going to do it anyway. Well, why? It's not fair. Because the teacher told you to do it. Life's not fair. We don't always get seemingly our just desserts and things. It just doesn't equal out at times the way we think that it should equal out. It's just the way it is. And while we judge things and base things upon a lot of different issues, we know that brutality of life often causes emotional strain and stress, physical problems and ailments. And we know then, of course, that it affects our behavior. Sometimes what we need is a little hope. It's going to be better tomorrow. It's going to be sunny tomorrow. Well, I don't know, but it's raining now. You know, that's the way some people are. Can we offer them hope? Sure. The challenge is to offer them hope. Well, what is hope? Hope is anticipation. Biblically speaking, hope is anticipation plus expectation. It's the idea of anticipating what is to come and expecting it to be a reality. That's hope. That's hope. Hope is looking for the future, if you will, and having a reasonable expectation and a confidence that that's going to be met. Romans chapter 15, Paul reminds us that hope, that's what God's all about. For God is the God of hope. Verse 33. God is hope. He tells us as individuals that we're to live in hope. It becomes the anchor of our soul, Hebrews chapter 6. The anchor of our soul that's both sure and steadfast. We need hope. We thrive on hope. You see, we're always hoping that tomorrow's better. We're always hoping that something improves, something gets better. You don't want your doctor to come in, once again using a doctor, you don't want your doctor to come in and say, you have no time. You have no time. In 2006, my father passed away. My father had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It had come back the second time. And I think we all knew that there wasn't anything they could do for him. But the doctor sent my father home. He said, he's doing all right. I followed the doctor outside because I realized that we were fixing to send my father home. And so I followed him outside and I said, sir, I need to know something because I don't live around here. My sister does, but I don't. And I have to make plans. How long does my father have? Oh, he could have 2 years. 3 days later, my father passed away. Before that, when we carried him home, that night, in the morning, the next day, as I was fixing to come back to Middle Tennessee, I realized and called my sister in because I said, Mom can't handle him. He is not in a shape where Mom can handle him, so we're going to have to do something. We had hospice coming already. And so we talked about it, and as fortune would have it, God would have it. The lady that was head of hospice in the area went to church with Mom and Dad, sat, I think, right behind or right in front, right behind Mom and Dad. Knew Dad well. When she came to see Dad, I said, we've got to do something different. This is not going to work. And she said, well, Dr. Smith was afraid of that. And I said, why didn't Dr. Smith tell me when I asked him point blank what I needed to know? Well, I don't know. Well, I'm sure in some way he thought he was offering me hope. What I wanted was reality. Sometimes folks, though, need hope, but they need true hope. It is going to get better tomorrow. The sun is going to shine. Things are going to work out. Things are going to be better. We need that hope. That hope becomes the anchor of the soul. That hope that's found truly in God. While the psalmist would ask the question in Psalm 42, verse 5, that why is my soul disquieted in me? Then what does he say? He says, I hope in God. I hope in God. That's where I find my hope. That's where I find my peace. I find my hope in God. And so we become individuals that complete the challenge of helping others find that hope. How do we do that? Tell them of God's love. Tell them of something that you say they don't want to hear right now, and that's really right. But tell them that Paul was right in Romans chapter 8, that if God be for us, who can be against us? God's for us. God's on our side. God's not fighting against us. God knows, God hears, God understands. God readies his ear to listen to the prayer of the wise man. And in God ready to hear the prayer of the wise man realizes one thing, I want to save you. God is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. 2 Peter 3, verse 9. That's what God wants. We need to offer that hope. That hope that says God will help you, God will get you through. Stories told of a little boy that had grown sick and was unable to attend school. And so while he had been out for quite a long period of time, he was in the hospital all this time. There was a teacher one day that showed up. School had sent her out. They had asked her to go out and to teach the little boy. He'd gotten so far behind. And so the teacher had agreed. She got to the hospital. She went to the nurse's station. She asked what room the little boy was in, and then she told them why she was there. She told them that she was there to teach the little boy. They thought it was wonderful. They agreed. But they told the teacher, they said, but you got to know something. Said he's been very distant, very cold. very push off, very much discouraged. She said, okay. And so she went, she taught him a lesson. 2 days later, she came back to teach him another lesson. When she did, the nurses in the hallway stopped her and said, we want to know what you told him. We want to know what you told him. He has been a completely different person since you came. Said he smiles now, he laughs, he talks to other people. What did you say to him? And she said, well, I didn't say anything to him. I just taught him a lesson. And so a day or so later, a nurse that had been off for 2 or 3 days noticed he was completely different. And she said, what got into you? And he said, my teacher came to teach me about nouns and adverbs. Odd combination, but anyway. Nouns and adverbs, yes. And he said, I figured I was going to live. He said, that school wouldn't send a teacher to teach me nouns and adverbs if I wasn't going to live. And so I'm going to make it. I'm going to be all right. We need to extend that same kind of hope to others if we're going to be good encouragers, because folks need it. But then, fourthly, to be a good encourager, we need to work on getting along with people. We need to get along with people in peace. Some people just greet you the wrong way, don't they? And some folks that need encouraging, their attitude and their personality is different than your attitude and personality. It's just, we all have our own personality. Mine's unique to me. Yours is unique to you, if you will. We're not the same. We are the same, but we're not the same. We're different. We're turned different. A lot of it's due to how we were raised. A lot of it's due to our own choosing with regards to our own likes and dislikes, our own personalities, our own philosophies of life, our own views, worldviews. It's a lot of factors that come in to how and why we think the way we think. But we're different. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye. You see, you have an opinion and I have an opinion. You have a thought, I have a thought. You have a way, I have a way. I shared with you the thought back some time ago, but I share it with you again. And my father raised me with this idea, and of course this tells you how old the philosophy was. But my dad used to say, your opinion and 25 cents will buy a cup of coffee. Now he would have to say your opinion and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee. But you get the idea. The idea is that really and truly your opinion is not worth that much. Gotcha. Understand. But at the same point in time, too, we need to understand that while we differ with one another, and while our opinions may not always match, our thoughts may not always match, that we can still learn to get along with people by living in peace. The Bible reminds us that we're to live in peace one with another. Romans 14, verse 19. As much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. Romans chapter 12, verse 17. Peaceful people that live in peace with others. You see, that's our challenge. Learn to get along with others. Learn that while you may not always see eye to eye, and sometimes while you have to agree to disagree, you just do that. But if you're going to be a good encourager, you've got to say, okay, I'm going to get along with these people whether it kills me or not. And sometimes it might. But good encouragers learn to say, okay, I see the problem, but I understand that it's important that we be individuals that live in peace. That we be individuals that, as Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they're called the children of God. That we learn to be at peace with others. That becomes our challenge. But how do we fulfill that challenge? Well, we fulfill that challenge by being folks that don't always have to push back. We don't have to get the last word in. We don't have to have the last say. We don't have to push ourselves on others. We can learn to listen. The art of listening is a whole different issue in and of itself. But good encouragers learn to say, okay, we have differences, but let's make those differences count. Let's not be at odds with one another. Let's learn to get along with one another. The story of Jacob and Esau teaches us that, doesn't it? The story of Jacob and Esau, brothers that unfortunately couldn't get along. A brother Esau that sold his birthright to his brother Jacob. Brothers that basically couldn't be at peace. And sometimes when we have those disruptions, nothing is settled and nothing is gained. Sometimes friends separate. Sometimes friends go their separate ways. Why? Because they can't agree to disagree. Because they can't agree to see past their differences to say, that's all right, we're in this together. Christians need to learn to do that, to be at peace with others. And to be a good encourager, we have to learn to be at peace with others. Now, all of this, you look at it and you might say, well, are you saying, Brother Paul, are you saying that we condone sin? No, I'm not saying that. Are you saying that we wink at sin? No, I'm not saying that. You saying that it's all right to think a little less with regards to the way people are living their life morally? No. No, we're not changing the Bible. We're not changing the truth. We're not changing anything with regards to God, His will, and His way. But we are learning how to get along with people. We are learning how to be a blessing to others. Because when you stop and think about it, that's what God called us to. According to Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, by love, we're to serve one another. By love, we're to serve one another. And how do we do that? Well, there's many different ways, but one way is, as Isaiah 50 and verse 4 says, oh, Lord, give me the tongue of the learned that I may know how to speak a word. And I may know how to speak a word of what? A word of wisdom, a word of encouragement, a word of help to the wise. That needs to be our prayer. Lord, give me a tongue that I may speak a good word to others. Because after all, while Paul was talking about a completely different subject than encouragement, he reminds us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 19, though, that we're to do all things for edifying. This then becomes our ministry. In Romans chapter 12, verse 6, Paul says that as we have gifts, we basically are to use those gifts, right? Isn't it interesting when you get down to verse 8 of Romans 12 that he talks about that one of those gifts being the idea of edifying or building up one another, encouraging one another. Oh, Lord, give us the tongue of the wise, that we may speak a word in due season to those that are hurting. This evening, if you're not a New Testament child of God, if you need to put your Lord and Savior on in baptism for the remission of your sins, or you need to come and rededicate your life, our prayer is that you'll come while together we stand and sing.